My name is Craig Campbell, and I'm the feeding coordinator for the Baptist Resource Network of Pennsylvania, South Jersey. Today I'd like to share with you the feeding unit training for disaster relief. Let's start off talking a little bit about unit structure. So the unit manager, the blue cap, is in charge of the day-to-day operations of the unit. Each unit will also have the following: a head cook to supervise the preparation of all meals, an inventory coordinator to provide an up-to-date inventory daily, a serving line coordinator to supervise the serving line, a comfort station coordinator to keep fluids and snacks available for the volunteers at all times, and a wash station supervisor overseeing the washing and sanitizing of the pots, pans, utensils, and cambros. So let's talk a little bit about these. The feeding unit is a little bit different than the other units in that we do have a lead person in each of these areas. And the reason for that is because the blue cap is very busy from sunup to sundown on a feeding operation. This is really an exercise in large-scale cooking and logistics for the teams. So that blue cap will walk up to the lead person area, ask them to do something, and then turn around and walk away 9 times out of 10. So it's very important, especially if I happen to be that blue hat, that right then I'm looking for you, if you have any issues, to let me know. I don't understand what you asked me to do. I'm concerned about whether we can do it, because when I walk away, I'm going to trust that the team that you're a part of is going to get that task done, or you're going to come back to me and say there's an issue that we need to work out. So that's very important. The other thing I'll say on this, which is not maybe obvious, if we look at number 4 there, the comfort station coordinator, one of the purposes behind this is sanitation, right? So when people come to the kitchen from a disaster, you don't know where they've been, what they've been doing, what they've been touching, but I know where you've been and what you've been doing. Your hands are clean. So I don't want the public reaching into a cooler to get something. They can pick up a prepackaged food, but anything that involves reaching into something, I want our volunteers doing so that everything stays sanitary for the public. We'll also have a maintenance coordinator to help see that things get repaired and serviced as need be. If you're working a station, you do not have time to fix what's not working in that equipment. This is really one of the most important positions on the unit, because this is a person that helps to see everything stays running. A housing coordinator to help coordinate housing for the volunteers, a place to eat, bathe, and sleep. This may be a permanent position on a deployment, or maybe a temporary thing that has to be done as we come in. It depends on how busy a site is, how many people are coming and going. Hopefully we talked about it a little bit in preparing to serve, but the kitchen team is really one of those where we try to go half a week at a time at a minimum. Because this team has a flow to it. We have deadlines we have to meet in terms of time, that lunch has to be ready and dinner has to be ready. So we try to do half a week, prefer a week at a time when the volunteers can do it. An office coordinator also is used to help the unit manager. An IRF coordinator a lot of times will be a part of the team. So this is the individual that's coordinating with Red Cross team, for the food being ready, and also any of our volunteers that would like to ride an IRV. We are permitted to ride IRVs. This can be especially important if we're at a remote site from a disaster and not able to visit with some of the survivors from whatever event has taken place. If we can spare you from the kitchen team, that is a possibility for you to go out for an IRV run. Typically that might be 3 or 4 hour run at a time. A communications coordinator will be a licensed ham operator. This may be in disasters where we have other forms of communications down. Some of the large hurricanes and that, we may have very limited cell phone communications in the area that we're in. So this person would help us overcome those limitations. And a chaplain finally to focus on the spiritual, mental, and emotional care of volunteers and victims. One other comment I think I'll say in general, a lot of times we have volunteers that train and maybe they say, I don't cook, I don't want to cook. You can still help us on the kitchen. If you like to drive a forklift, if you like to run a pressure washer, you can spend all week working on a kitchen team and never stir a pot, never touch food. So we have lots of places where people can plug into. Let's talk a little bit now about food handling. So the kitchen uses only commercially processed foods. So no home processed foods may be used by the feeding units. No home prepared foods may be used by the feeding unit. No fresh vegetables or meats may be used by the unit. So these are all restrictions placed on us by the health department. When we go in where a disaster has occurred, the local health department has jurisdiction on our ability to serve food. So these are health department requirements that we have to live with. Now, practically, what that can mean is the following. We go to a church and we set up and we put out our trailer and we put out our banner, and Mrs. Jones down the street sees us. And she comes walking down the street with her very best pan of something. And she wants us to use it to help her community because she's excited to help. She's excited that we're there to help. And the first thing you do is send her to the Blue Hat. Now, what the Blue Hat is going to do is the following. We're going to try and encourage her to take it someplace where it can be used. And we're going to be sensitive to how she's receiving that message. And if she's not receiving that message well, we're going to take it from her and thank her for it. And when she is out of sight, if we have concerns about the condition of that food, it's going in the dumpster. If we don't have concerns about the condition of the food, guess what you're having for dinner? You're not the public, so we're not under the same restrictions for you. Cambros. So Cambros are the insulated containers that we use to keep the food hot or the food cold, as the case may be. So when you're working with these, you want to check the seal on each Cambro before placing food in them. Make sure they seal up tight because that's what keeps the food hot. Cambros, when they are properly sealed, they'll lose about 4 degrees per hour if they are not open. So they keep the food hot tremendously long. And that's important. You have to understand that when you're out with the field kitchen, you cook very differently than you do at home. I don't know about you, but I don't start cooking lunch at 6 in the morning. But we do. And we'll have first lunch out of the kitchen before 8 a.m. That food will not get served until 11:30, 12, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So what keeps that food safe is your sanitary practices in the kitchen and the temperature of the food. So this is very important. If you are serving food, you want to make sure you're checking the temperature every 2 hours. We have 4 hours basically once it drops below 140 to consume it or get it back up above 140. Otherwise it has to be thrown out. The use of insert trays or liners in Cambros is preferred. All of our recent deployments, we have used liners. They're basically a sanitary trash bag. It's a little harder on the servers, but it's much easier on the wash crew. Chill cold foods before placing them in Cambros. Ideally, we have ice. If it's Florida in the summertime, we might only have air conditioning in a fellowship hall, or we might have a refrigerated trailer that we can put some things in. Use ice to keep foods cool in the Cambros. So in the case of something cold, we might put a layer of ice underneath the sanitary liner and then put the liner on top of that. Preheat Cambros with hot water if it's practical. In our kitchen, this is always a practical event for us. We have 2 instant hot water heaters on the kitchen. So you want to do that, preheat the Cambro so that the food doesn't heat the Cambro when it goes in. That will keep your temperature longer for the food. Cool the Cambros with ice or refrigeration before use. Sanitation. Sanitize all utensils before using them. Hand washing. Wash your hands with hot water and soap for 20 seconds. I have some volunteers that are EMTs. They like to sing happy birthday in their head once or twice while they're doing that to kind of get the time frame. Always wash your hands before starting to work. Wash your hands when you change tasks so we don't have cross-contamination. Wash your hands after going to the restroom. I hope you do this normally in life. Always wash hands after touching something or someone, including yourself. Kind of the mindset is, once you get your hands clean in the kitchen, I want you to kind of think of yourself as maybe somebody in an operating room might. Know where these guys are at all times. You're going to wash your hands more in our kitchen than you do any other time in your life. You're going to change gloves more in our kitchen than you do any other time in your life. That's fine. We plan for that. We order for that. I don't care how many sets of gloves you go through. It's important to keep the food sanitary. Only use hand antiseptics after hand washing. Don't use them in place of hand washing, and wait for them to dry before touching food or equipment. It's really not a substitute for soap and water. The other thing I'll say is frequently, especially in the food preparation area itself, a lot of times we keep an eye on each other. Because sometimes if you're like me and have an allergy and you do something like this, you don't think about it or realize it. So just say something to your neighbor, hey, you need to change your gloves, wash your hands if you see something. So wear gloves when you're handling food. Wash your hands before putting on new gloves. Change your gloves when you touch something other than the food. As soon as they become soiled or torn, before beginning a different task. At least every 4 hours during continual use, and more often if necessary. If you're in the food preparation part of the kitchen, I can't imagine a set of gloves will last you 4 hours. The only place it might is on the comfort station. And also, change your gloves after handling raw meat, seafood, or poultry, and before handling ready-to-eat food. Raw food for us on the kitchen is very unusual because it slows down our preparation time. So generally we're doing reheating of food most deployments. Wear caps. Disaster relief caps are used for identification. They meet health department requirements for hair covering. They provide protection for the volunteers from elements. Now, if you're like me and you're a little bit light on the top, if you're going to be outside in the open sun, you might need some sunscreen on the top because those caps are mesh caps. So keep that in mind. And also, hopefully we talked about this in preparing to serve, make sure you've got appropriate clothing. If the kitchen is out, local government is relying on us to serve food to the public. So other than cases of public safety, we're going to serve. If it's raining out, we're going to work with that. We're still going to cook and to serve. Sometimes we might have to pull people in from chainsaw crews or mud out crews if we're short-staffed in the kitchen, because we've got to meet those expectations placed by local government on us to get the food to the public. Aprons. Remove aprons when you leave the prep areas. So for example, if you're going to take out the trash, make sure that you leave your apron in the kitchen when you do that. That's protecting the food, so you don't want to have that out in other areas when you're wearing it. So soiled aprons should be changed or discarded. Most of the times we're using disposable aprons for everybody, except for the people that are working with open flame appliances like the turkey fryers. So on those, we are not using the plastic. You want to make sure you're in a cloth apron for those. Jewelry and nails. Rings, except for plain bands, bracelets, medical bracelets, and watches may not be worn in the food prep areas. False fingernails and nail polish also may not be worn in the food prep area. Fingernails should be short and clean. Keep the work area clean. Clean work area is easier to work within. It's required by the health department. It's easier to find your supplies. And also keeps down infestation of bugs and pests. Especially in the wash area, we want to make sure that at night, if we have some things that are not washed up, we want to make sure those are covered up. We don't want critters to come in overnight and find things and make a mess. Temperatures. Frozen foods must be kept below 0 degrees. Cold foods must be kept below 40 degrees. So this is one of the duties of the inventory team, to make sure the refrigerated trailers are at temperature. Hot foods must be kept above 145. Foods must be cooked to an inside temperature as follows. And what you'll see is all of these we put at 165 because we're doing reheating rather than cooking from scratch. Some of those numbers would be lower if we were scratch cooking. But the other thing is, this determines how long you can hold the food. So most of the head cooks that I've worked for, they're pulling off main items at 180 degrees Fahrenheit off the stove. Vegetables might be as high as 200 even. So that, gives us extra time to hold the food. All right, there's a reheat comment. Do not serve with an inside temperature below 145. And the unit director, cooks, and dishwashers are to have thermometers with them at all times. The dishwasher one there might surprise you a little bit, but that's because we have temperature requirements on our wash barrels. So let's talk a little bit about the dishwashing. Commercial standard is to use 3 sinks for washing dishes. The first one is filled with hot soapy water between 110 and 120 degrees. And you change the water when refuge is in the sink or when the temperature dictates. Soap and detergent are cleansing agents only. They're not going to sanitize what you're washing. So if you're only changing for a temperature reason, you have the possibility of drawing the barrel partway down, filling it back up with hot water to maintain your temperature. So our version of this, I should say, is basically 55-gallon trash cans when we're in this mode of washing. So a number of times a day, I've drawn them down halfway to do for temperature, but several times a day you are going to change out the barrels because of debris being in them. So your second sink is going to have rinse water, again at the same temperature, 110 to 120 degrees. You might use a basket for small items. You'll make sure you get all the soap off and change it when it becomes soapy. Again, if it's just a temperature issue, you can drop it down halfway and put hot water in to raise the temperature back up. And the third sink is sanitizing water. So you see a lower temperature here. This is basically room temperature on a good day. And the mixture is 1 tablespoon of bleach per gallon of water. And the item must be in contact with a sanitizing agent for 10 seconds. If you're using quaternary tablets, that contact time is 30 seconds. So our preference definitely is to use bleach. And then you place the item on the drain board and air dry. We do not dry our dishes. Health department considers that a way to spread contamination. So it's always an air dry. We're doing that on wire racks, or we're doing that on sanitized pallets. All right, so we've talked about changing at regular intervals and to keep a watch on your temperature. And we need to use an approved water source. That's one of the phone calls we make when we roll into a disaster site, is we get in touch with the local emergency operations center to determine whether the city water supply is potable. If it's not, frequently we're supplied by the military or the National Guard with water to run the kitchen. Clean your sinks thoroughly before and after use. All right, so that's the sides. So let me talk a little bit further about what's typical for us today in the wash line. And that's actually, we use pressure washers for the first 2 sinks. So we have the ability to dispense soap in those, and we're feeding those with one of the instant hot water heaters. So the other comment about that is typically we're running those at 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And that helps to get any grease off the dishes even without soap. Most greases break down the 140 degree Fahrenheit range. So be very respectful of the temperature of that water, that you don't burn yourself. And then we'll have a barrel for doing the sanitizing. So I think finally also, just to wrap up a little bit, talking about the equipment that's on our kitchen currently, our kitchen's capable of 10,000 meals a day. That's 5,000 for lunch, 5,000 for dinner. We're running 2 tilt skillets or braising pans, 2 convection ovens, 4 rice cookers, and 4 turkey fryers. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to go through the training with me today, and have a good rest of your day.